At the turn of the 20th century, Namibia was not called Namibia. It was German Southwest Africa, one of the lesser-known but deeply important colonies of the German Empire. In 1884, during the European scramble for Africa, Germany claimed this arid stretch of land along Africa's southwestern coast. The Herero and Nama were two of the most prominent indigenous peoples there. Proud cattle herders with long histories, strong social structures, and a deep spiritual connection to their land. For decades, European traders and missionaries had passed through, but German colonization brought something far harsher: land theft, forced labor, racial segregation, and brutal economic exploitation. The Germans, under the direction of imperial administrators, began seizing the best pasture land for settlers. Herero and Nama communities were pushed on as smaller, less fertile plots, their cattle stolen or destroyed. Contracts, often signed under coercion or misunderstanding, transferred huge areas of ancestral land to German settlers. Tensions grew. Indigenous leaders protested, but their voices were ignored. By the early 1900s, resentment was at boiling point. In January 1904, the Herero people, under their paramount chief Samuel Maharero, decided they could no longer endure the theft and humiliation. They launched a coordinated uprising against German colonial forces and settlers. The Herero targeted German farms and outposts, destroying property and killing over 100 settlers in the initial revolt. Chief Maharero explicitly ordered his fighters not to harm women, children, or missionaries, a moral code the Germans would later ignore completely. The uprising stunned the German Empire. Back in Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II was determined to crush the resistance quickly and decisively. He dispatched thousands of soldiers under the command of General Lothar von Trotha, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness had been forged in earlier colonial wars. Von Trotha did not come to negotiate. He came with a doctrine of racial extermination, and he put it in writing. On October 2, 1904, he issued his infamous Vernichtungsbefehl, extermination order. Within the German border, every Herero, with or without a rifle, with or without cattle, will be shot. I will no longer accept women or children. I will drive them back to their people or let them be shot. This was not just a military campaign, it was a blueprint for genocide. Von Trotha's forces pushed the Herero into the Omaheke Desert, a barren expanse east of their homeland. Wells were poisoned or guarded, and anyone who tried to return was killed. Without water, tens of thousands of Herero died of thirst and starvation under the burning Namibian sun. At first, the Nama people, led by chiefs like Hendrik Witbooi and later Jacob Marengo, tried to remain neutral. But they too had suffered land loss, forced labor, and humiliation. When they saw what was being done to the Herero, they took up arms in 1905. Von Trotha responded with the same brutality. The Nama were hunted down, their cattle confiscated, and their communities destroyed. By 1908, the Nama population had been reduced by half. Survivors of the desert massacres were not spared. They were rounded up and sent to concentration camps, decades before the Nazis used that term in Europe. The most infamous was Shark Island, located near Lüderitz. It was less a camp and more a death sentence. Prisoners were forced into hard labor, often without adequate food, clothing, or shelter from the icy Atlantic winds. Disease, malnutrition, and exhaustion killed thousands. Some estimates put the death rate on Shark Island at over 70%. The camps also served another, darker purpose: medical experimentation. German scientists, interested in eugenics and racial theories, used the skulls and bodies of Herero and Nama prisoners for so-called research. Many of these remains were shipped to Germany, where they were displayed in museums or used in pseudoscientific studies that would later inspire Nazi ideology. By the end of 1908, between 60,000 to 80,000 Herero, about 80% of their population, and 10,000 Nama, about 50% of theirs, were dead. And then, the story was buried. In Germany, the genocide was framed as a necessary colonial war. The atrocities were downplayed or justified as punishment for rebellion. Colonial officers who carried out the massacres faced no trials. For decades, history books in both Germany and Namibia either omitted or softened the events. Survivors were left to carry the trauma in silence. The land stolen during that time remained in settler hands, and the descendants of the Herero and Nama lived in poverty and displacement. It wasn't until the late 20th century that historians, activists, and descendants began to force the story back into public consciousness. In the 1990s, Namibian independence from South African rule gave the Herero and Nama a new platform to demand justice. In 2001, the Herero filed a lawsuit in a U.S. court against the German government and the companies that had profited from forced labor. While the case was dismissed on legal grounds, it intensified the pressure on Germany. Finally, in 2004, during a commemoration of the Genocide centenary, German Development Minister Heidmar Wiegel publicly acknowledged Germany's moral and historical responsibility and asked for forgiveness, though she stopped short of calling it genocide at the time. It would take until 2015 for the German government to formally use the term genocide, and until May 2021 for Germany to officially recognize the atrocities and agree to a financial aid package worth €1.1 billion over 30 years for development projects in Namibia. The 2021 agreement was presented as a gesture of reconciliation, but many Herero and Nama leaders rejected it. They argued that they had been excluded from the negotiations, which were conducted between the German and Namibian governments. The aid package was not reparations but development assistance, with no legal admission of liability. The amount offered could not possibly compensate for the mass killing, land theft, and generational trauma. For many descendants, Germany's acknowledgment was too little, too late. The bones of their ancestors, stolen for research, still sat in European museums. Their land was still gone. Their communities still bore the scars of dispossession. The genocide of the Herero and Nama was the first of the 20th century, a grim prelude to later atrocities in Armenia, the Holocaust, Rwanda, and elsewhere. In fact, some historians draw a direct line between German colonial brutality in Namibia and later Nazi ideology. The racial theories tested in Africa found a horrific echo in Europe. The use of concentration camps, forced labor, and extermination orders foreshadowed the Holocaust. In Namibia today, the genocide remains a raw wound. Many descendants live in rural poverty on marginal lands. The call for land restitution, not just financial compensation, is still central to their demands. The Herero and Nama genocide was hidden for a century for several reasons. Colonial silence. European powers rarely documented their crimes truthfully, and when they did, they controlled the narrative. Global distraction. The atrocities occurred in a remote African colony far from European media centers. Historical whitewashing. For decades, German colonialism was portrayed as relatively mild compared to other empires, a myth shattered by these events. It was only in the era of decolonization and historical reckoning that this hidden genocide began to be fully exposed. The Herero and Nama genocide is a reminder that history's darkest chapters are often the ones most deliberately erased. It challenges us to ask, who writes history? Who benefits from forgetting? And what is the cost of silence? The genocide's long suppression shows how power can control memory and how justice delayed, for over a century, is justice denied.